Hey, good morning. Welcome to another edition of Wake Up and Ship More. I am your host, Joe. Excited to be back with some new stuff all about building software, entrepreneurship, just the ins and outs of not just like actually coding some of the stuff that goes into it. We're going to talk about all kinds of stuff. On previous episodes, we've been talking about MVPs, app architecture, things like that. Today we are talking about, so the title of the episode is Feeling the Flow. We're talking about some flow charts. We're going to talk about just charting in general in software preparation, kind of what that means. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of my experience that I think has been really beneficial to how I build and actually ship different software. And so we're going to talk about all kinds of stuff. If you are not already, I really encourage you to please make sure that you are following along with all of DevHub's different socials. This is now streaming in multiple places. We are streaming live on YouTube, on Twitch, X. Instagram is new today. We started actually live streaming on Instagram. We also stream directly in the Telegram group for this. And I'll put that here at the bottom. So if you are watching this on a replay, if you are watching this at a different time, if you've downloaded and saved it for later, you can join the Telegram group at any time and ask questions there and be part of that conversation there. And I hope that is hugely beneficial to people as well. But we also stream this here as well. So tons of places to actually follow along. If you haven't already, make sure you've actually already grabbed the shard.dog. It's also the QR code in the top corner. This will just kind of get you into the group as we kind of continue to experiment with some different stuff as well. And then lastly, before I jump into stuff, a couple just other housekeeping things. I'm going to bring it up here. If you are not already signed up to the DevHub newsletter, please sign up to that. Just make sure that actually that link is still the right one here, because that's I know we changed it for a little bit, but DevHub sign up. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Yep, perfect. So if you go to that link, you can sign up for our newsletter. This is our newsletter about the developer ecosystem here on the Near Protocol. There's lots of different information you can get there. If you go there, if you've already signed up for the newsletter, I encourage you to still go there because there's two new fields. They're completely optional, and we just want to be able to better get a sense of who our builders are. So there's a place to put in your GitHub username. That's it. Just want to know like your username to see what you're actually building and be able to connect with you on different topics there, as well as if you are on Near Protocol and you want to share your wallet. Again, this helps us kind of put all the pieces together. But totally optional. You do not have to put that in. But again, it's just a way for us to better connect with the community and who's following along. So that's that. Let's get into though some of the good stuff here around development and everything else. So I'm gonna bring a couple of things here onto the stage here. So let's start with okay, we're gonna here. So today I'm talking about charts, and you can see the little graphic, and I'll make that bigger in a second here. A basic chart flow charts you've probably seen, and there's a lot of different. Again, I'll say just similar to the stuff that we talked about, like with the MVPs and everything else. A lot of things are very opinionated. You'll see different books, even maybe like textbooks you might have been taught a particular way of how to do certain things, and especially like there are some very actually procedural based like flowcharts that are out there, especially if you are doing software architecture. There are some very clear like expectations sometimes, especially in like large enterprise environments, of like what a flowchart looks like. But I want to take the perspective though of the small dev team, the solo developer, somebody who's maybe still new and learning, whatever that might be, and how some basic flow charting and just some basic charting can really actually help your overall building experience not just for like how you're able to get maybe things done and built faster, but also like how you're able to actually conceptualize different processes and functions in your own mind. Okay. And typically you're going to see here. So if we're going to talk about, like, let's say, if we're talking about flowcharts, you think of this simple, like I have A, it goes to B, right? And then maybe B branches off into like, right, C and D, kind of like basic stuff. And that's part of it, and we're going to absolutely go through some of that. But I also think it's important to kind of look at what else can actually come of this from a standpoint of how do you talk to other developers, how do you talk to your team members, how do you, talk to yourself, and actually get a better sense of like what you need to do. So let me pull up just this chart here, and I'm going to actually zoom in a little bit here so we can see this a little bit better. Okay. So here is an example, and these are everything I'm going to show today are actually things I've really actually used. So these are not just like made up examples. I think, and I'm doing this because I think it's really relevant to show like actually, how this is used in the real world. So this is an older one from a few years back in having a discussion actually about like, how could we look at some data resources leading into an API that we were considering building on this small team. And, again, this is really simple. It's not really like telling you much about the flow, and that's not really what this is for. Like, this was for clearly a discussion with other team members. Not every team member is also technical sometimes, especially if you're an entrepreneur, if you're in a startup. You're going to have some people on your team who are maybe less technical or not technical at all, serving different roles. You need to be able to have these discussions, and sometimes something that's visual is really helpful. And so in this example here is, this is not necessarily a flow chart because I'm not showing the flow of the data per se, but I'm showing like what actually goes into the API to populate it. And like we're building out some custom stuff here of user data and interaction info. And that's going to be tied into stuff like, blockchain data, collection data, which is referring to like NFT collection data, and like the annotations that people are able to do, all feeding into, annotations meaning notes on something. All of this could feed into a single API for the data set. And then it allows, I said, okay, this could come from Block Eden. I don't know if Block Eden still exists. I think it does. And you could do all that. Now, the reason why this is relevant. So when you're working on a distributed team, one, be able to show like all these different pieces in a very clear picture is sometimes better than actually writing it in a document. Not everybody can pick up what you mean when you're writing something out. It also shows exactly everything that's feeding into it. And so when I am considering like what am I actually need to be aware of and how robust is this API, how much work is going to go into this API, I have to actually be ready to say, oh, okay, there's a lot of different data sets in here. And when you see that, right, and you see like, oh, okay, there's a lot of data sets in here, that will then inform other decisions I make later. So let's go to, let me go back to here for a second. So when we talked about like app architecture and stuff like that, being able to see something like all these different data sources, it then lets me start to consider of like, what do I need to actually be aware of for my app architecture? How much like I need to now have based off of what I just showed in that example. This is just an example. I need a database. I probably need maybe something like a short-term storage. So something maybe like a Redis type of setup, because I need something just maybe in memory, so I'm not actually making full API calls to a third party while trying to call my own internal APIs, things like that. And so now all of this stuff, as well as like, let's say third party, right? So now all of this stuff here is all leading into, my API, and that's a consideration I have to make, right? So that's one part of that. Also here, this helps like if we're not all at the same time zone, if we're meeting asynchronously, they can get a little better sense of, again, uh, what I'm referring to when I'm talking about stuff. So that's one example. So let me show you now another example here, and we'll go from that to a full actual flow chart. Okay, so share my screen. Okay, so this this example here is an actual flowchart, and this is something that, and here I'll zoom in a little bit here too, so we can see some a little bit better. So for my project ShardDog, I did a presentation once on what maybe could happen and how maybe ShardDog can address some voting processes and making sure that we're able to do some screening around voting. So this was not actually ever implemented this way. This was just a presentation, but this is an actual flowchart to show, again, the life cycle of uh, the user journey, essentially, I guess, right? That's how we'll kind of put it. So this is where we're actually going through. We're saying, okay, a user starts here at the green, is going to go through some process. I like to use these little like sticky note looking things as a way to add some notes, because again, a lot of times somebody is reading this asynchronously, like they're reading this on their own there, so I'm not there to talk it through, and so it gives me an opportunity to give some notes. And I think this is like super powerful because they're just little notes, but it really helps put together a bigger picture of like what's actually really happening here, because sometimes it's just like a little box of like, oh, like what is this service here, and like, okay, now we can explain that. And then, you have your logic of like, okay, does it, yes, no type of thing, true, false, and based off of what's happening. And again, like having a little note here of what's a possibility, what's something to be considered, things like that. And then it goes through a whole flow, and we talk about like, okay, okay, here's a new process, here's a wallet login, where is this getting logged? It has to go someplace. And you can see there's no actual like architecture here. There's no like reference to like what kind of database setup it is. It's really just focused on flow. It's focused on, again, the user experience, the user journey. So why do we go through all of this? Well, one is, when you're building, it helps you actually get a sense of, what are the expectations that I have to go through. So when I am planning out what I'm building, I know that I need to have all these different steps here. That's one part of it. The other part of it too is that when I'm doing testing of what I built, does it match the expectation of what we wrote out in the flowchart? And sometimes, yeah, that's going to match up, but maybe like you had to make a decision while building for something that just didn't make sense for whatever reason. Technologically, it was taking too much time, it didn't work, it was too hard, whatever. And then you can go back and you can compare that to your original expectations, and then you can match things up, hopefully, and say, okay, here's where we can fix, or this still works, or this still matches the expected outcome. But if I hadn't planned ahead of time, so let's just say I'm building a voter process, and I hadn't planned this ahead of time. I don't have this flowchart, and something goes wrong, or I shouldn't say wrong. If something is not working the way I expected to while building, I may come to the point where like I'm now making different decisions here, and I don't know if it still matches my outcome because I haven't actually mapped out the workflow. And this is something that you can certainly do here as well on like smaller parts. So again, when you're a solo dev or on a small team, it is definitely, and I completely sympathize with it, it's hard to do a lot of this work because you feel a constant pressure to build and you feel a constant pressure to ship something. And there's like, oh, it's just me building, and so I need to actually have output and everything else like that. And again, I think that is fine in a lot of cases, especially early on, like you're trying to get that MVP out, like we talked about last week. if you're trying to just experiment, you're hacking around, doing different things. As soon as you start to get to a point where you're actually trying to get a product in people's hands, now, again, there's a couple things here that we haven't totally talked about, but are really relevant here. I understand when you're a solo dev or again small team, it is sometimes it feels overwhelming to write too many stories if you're trying to follow like an agile development process. And so maybe you kind of half-ass your stories, and you could probably get away with that. Okay, you could probably get away with like a punch list of things. Fine, not a huge deal. You can probably get away with, also just, minimizing your actual like unit tests, things like that, because you're going to actually be hands-on testing a lot more, and writing unit tests takes a long time. And again, you're trying to hit windows, you're trying to ship stuff, you're trying to get things out in people's hands. Totally get it. Understandably that you would maybe cut some things short there. But I will say one area I always try to not cut short is something like this. There's these different flow charts, or even again, like the chart I showed before, of just laying out the different areas of like, here's all the stuff that's flowing into my API. Here's all the data sources. In this example here, hey, here's how this is all going to work, and again, so that way I have at least something to compare this to, and I have outcomes. And what it's done for me, this is like one of those like productivity hacks things, but the boost here is that it has forced me as both a developer and the entrepreneur and all these different hats you have to wear on a small team or as a solo dev, of have I thought through what my product is actually supposed to do at different parts. And again, I'm not saying you have to write one of these out for every single part of your app. It's helpful, and I often will do it for most, but you should at least do it for your main functionality. And anything that is actually specialized, you should absolutely do this for, because again, it's forcing you to have that thought process. This is one of those like tricks where it's like, yeah, it's maybe it's not even like useful to anyone else but yourself, but it's worth putting in that work. And that's a really important piece here. Maybe I show this to nobody else. I'm a solo dev. No one else is going to see this. But for me, it lets me know that I have thought through the process here, and I now know what's going on here. So that's part of it too. Let me show though another one here, because there's the other way you can go too, which is more of like a diagramming method. And let's see, which one do I want to show here first? Okay, I'm gonna show one that like feels like overwhelming on purpose here. So hold on. Let me show this. Here we go. Okay. So this is not necessarily I wouldn't say a flowchart, but this is how all of maybe the components of an app all link together. This one was for a project planning that I was doing a while back. This is probably, I don't know, 5-6 years ago or so. And you can see I actually color coded things specifically because I wanted to highlight some things that were happening. So we were building this larger project that involved a lot of different third-party services, had multiple data sources, and actually needed to have some custom stuff that was built out around all of this. And so it was really a fairly complicated piece of software from an architectural standpoint. And so we wanted to highlight all of the features that were in there. So this is more of I would call this like a feature chart. Okay, so it's not really a flow chart. Some of it flows. You can see like things flow into one or the other. So like I'll zoom in a bit here, right? So you can see over here on this side that this is a flow chart of how things would maybe work here. And some of it though is just actually just services connecting. And so it varies. If I zoom all the way out, you can see the whole thing there. Now something like this. So why is this important? Okay, and why is this helpful? because one of the things that can happen is you can start to have your app and your software like really start to balloon and become like just full of features, right? Like you just you get to a point where like all of a sudden my app is no longer just this app that is doing A and B. It's now doing like A through Z, right? It's the whole thing. I'm doing all this different stuff. And sometimes you don't realize that until you start to plan it out. And one of the things that was, and I remember back that was really instructive around this here, when I wrote this out, was like seeing how many different services had to be involved, right? So, the purple here is third-party services, okay? And each one was actually, for the most part, I'm almost positive, were almost a different service each time. So there's a couple duplicates in there, but for the most part, there's a separate service each time. So now, as like we're planning things out and we're talking through things, you say, "Well, wait a second. I have 10 to 12 different external services now. I need to integrate in here." That's a lot. That's a lot, especially if you are a small team. Even at a big team, that's a lot. There's a lot of dependencies that you're now having inside your app, right? So that's stuff that's really, I think, important to be aware of. This also was super instructive too, because it let us know, like, okay, where are all the different custom pieces that are being fit in? So you can see everything that's kind of like this like peach kind of color. Like, so this was part of stuff that was happening in a mobile app. So you need to make sure that we have the right people doing stuff on the mobile side. And then everything that is in the like light purple or pinkish color, that was all like custom based server work. That's all back end work. And that was all custom. That was not part of the third party services. And so now you have like all of this stuff here. And this, again, while this feels kind of crazy, but there's so much stuff on here, right? And again, this is not a flow chart. This is just showing how different functions are all connecting and where stuff is linked to. You start to see the scope of your project. You start to get a sense just from like a snapshot. It's like a snapshot of like, oh, this is going to be the project. So now as you start to build out, like, here's my punch list, here's the stories, here's, my first half dozen sprints being planned out, you start to see the real scope of this. And it gives me a real sense of like, this is going to be a lot of work. This is going to be maybe more than we first planned for, because look how many, external dependencies there are. Look how many, custom things have to go into, tie into these external services and all of that. And so now, again, this is just that productivity piece for yourself of like, by doing this exercise, and this took a while to really plan out, you now see, oh, here's the scope of my thing. And so that's why this is like really important. And again, I really encourage this at, any level that you're doing this. And especially, again, if you are a solo or on a small team, to really map out this stuff. Because again, like let's go back to the other thing here. Let me go. Here, I'll show the very first one I just showed right here of like, right, this is just a basic data set. This is like much simpler than the other one, right? Obviously, but this is just showing all the different data sources that have to go into this API. It's really rudimentary, like it's really simple. I didn't color code it. But this, again, it was like super informative of like, look how much look how much stuff has to go into the APIs. Look how much data sources there is. And so that it informs, again, like your decision making. Like, is this too much work for one dev? Is this something that we can still ship as an MVP if that's what we're trying to go for? What becomes the timeline to actually ship this stuff when I have, 3 external data sources, 2 internal, and now I got to build, apps around it, right? So again, it goes back to this of like, what's going to become the flow once I actually see that, what do I need inside all of that? So that's where, again, I really want to like highlight and emphasize that this stuff is like super important for planning. Again, it's like a productivity hack, times 1,000. That's why I try to do this all the time. just again, even at the simplest manner, it doesn't always have to just be a flowchart either, per se. Let me show you one more here, and then we'll talk about some other stuff. And this is one where we did a little bit more kind of flowcharting around here. So let me show this. So now this is one where I start to blend a little bit with, I'm not showing the screen, here we go. Where we blend a little bit of that planning part along with some of the flowcharting part, right? So now you can see again, this is not, and if you're just joining us, this is not the traditional of like, here's how you make a flowchart. Or like if you're working in like a big company and you're like, they are asking you to develop a flowchart for like your architecture. This is not that. This is really for like planning. And this is again where I feel very strongly that, especially again, I'm talking to hopefully, solo devs, small teams, entrepreneurs, that this is the stuff that will really, hopefully give you a productivity boost and change how you approach software, because it's hypercritical that you are understanding everything that's actually going into your product, everything that has to go into your app. Like, you need to be aware of that. And so in this one here, in this planning, again, this is an older thing from an older project. And we were having conversation about like, what are all the feature sets in here and what goes into these feature sets, right? So, and then I color coded it though a little bit differently. So instead of color coding it on like decision trees and actual like a traditional like flowchart color coding, we said, what's actually been built and not in production? What's actually in production today? And what's planned for, but not actually either finalized or even built at all? And the reason why we wanted to do this is, one, you want to look at, how much total scope creep have we had over the years, and you can start to see like your stuff starts to balloon and balloon, right? And you have all these other features. And then like I also want to be able to see like, what have we built that's not actually in production that maybe fits into the flow here? So that was important to us. And then lastly, if we want to look at other features and we want to have some of these discussions around like, hey, let's build X, Y, and Z, like what has actually not been built yet, but we've talked about, and where does that tie in? Again, like what does that branch off of that we have today? And then that's the part that I think is like really, again, super important when you're trying to build. So in this example here, right, like, so like this is kind of, again, a quasi flow chart of like, how does the user begin? How do they enter the app? And this was a mobile app, in case you're curious. So, how do they enter the mobile app? Like, where's that data coming from? Like, what invites them? And then like when they go to like different pathways. So again, that's why this is like a quasi flow chart a little bit, but also kind of a diagram that helps show again all the different feature sets in here. And now again, here's an example where it's like, okay, if you're in this flow here, you see that there's a yellow, and the yellow was built and not in production. And so that's really helpful to inform a team meeting when we go through this. We can say, hey, like, we have this thing built, it's not in production, and it can hopefully spark a conversation of like, hey, it connects to this part of the app, this part of the flow. Should it be in production? What does it mean for it to be in production? Like, why did we not put it in production? And you can start to have all the discussions again, even if you're a small team, or even if you're by yourself, right? And you're that solo dev entrepreneur, which is super hard. I encourage you to have at least a co-founder, but separate discussion. We'll get there. Is like, just to have that conversation out loud sometimes of like, why did we build this and then not ship it? Why is it here? And like, what's stopping us from actually putting it in production? What does it mean for it to be in production? Is it going to lead to possibly more work that we're not ready to support? Do we not have the support system in there yet? A million different things maybe come up. maybe we built it, but it's not, we just didn't think it was good. Didn't work right, whatever. So it's just sitting on the shelf. Or maybe it was built, it was great at the time, but we never actually put it in production, and now it's outdated. So whatever the reasoning is, right? So it's important to highlight some of that stuff. We also wanted to be able to have discussions around, again, of like, hey, if I was going to expand a feature set, and I wanted to actually add something in and add an integration or add something else in, right? This is planned but not built. What does that start to mean? And this essentially like helps break off like what, again, that thought process, right? This is all about, understanding your product and what you're building and really pulling this all together of, again, like what's next. Because I'm going to be honest with you, and this is something I have seen for years and years now. I mean, I've been building software for a long time in different aspects. The biggest mistake that solo devs and like small teams make is you just start building stuff because it sounds cool, it's a cool feature, it's a cool idea. As a developer, we like to be challenged sometimes, right? So like we're jumping in to like just be part of that, challenge. We're like, oh yeah, like that's technically hard. I want to show off that I can build that. Awesome, like super cool, but like it doesn't, if you're trying to actually ship a product, it doesn't help you. And so it's important to be able to like objectively look at like, here's what I have in, again, like, so we color coded it. Here's what we have in production today. Here's what we're planning for. And like, and so again, like you can have that discussion for yourself. And then like I wanted to be able to show in this example here, again, this is again that hybrid model of some of it's a flow chart, some of it's just a feature set of what goes in there, right? And like, okay, and some stuff like, again, built but not in production. Like, okay, so here's some data resources. Why was this built but not put in production? And maybe the answer simply is like we don't have any customers that use that data. And like that's fine. And you're like, okay, cool, like we're ready. And so now if you have salespeople, or if you're an entrepreneur and you're a developer entrepreneur and you're doing some of the sales yourself, you say, oh, I have this feature that can attract other customers that I have not gone after yet. So I should sell to those customers because I already have something that they want already built. But it's not in production because nobody's using it. So I don't have any customers for it. These are important discussions. This is why you want to think this through. And I will also tell you, as you go and as the time goes on, if you are lucky enough to build on the same project for a while, a year or two, or 3 or 4, or maybe 10 years. Can I say lucky because so many projects start, fail, don't even make it, don't even really get going. So if you are in that camp, like you've been now working on the same project for a few years, that's incredible. And it's easy to forget like what you've already done. It's easy to forget like, oh, I have this code base that is relevant. It just needs like a little bit of tweaking, and I can unlock a new customer set. Right? You're struggling, you're plateauing on revenue, you're plateauing on sales, and you need something that's going to bring in new customers. Well, maybe you actually already have something. So planning this out is like really, really, I think, a super important piece of all of this. All right. Let's go back though, and I wanted to try to show you here. I think I have another one I can show that I think is like really, really relevant piece to talk through. Let me show you. Okay. So I wanna just show this last example here, and I think this is hopefully this is instructive for people. So all right, let me share my screen here. Okay, so I'm gonna give a warning. I'm gonna give before I put this on air here. This is going to look like total chaos. Okay, you thought the other ones look busy. You are not prepared for the amount of busyness that is going to be on your screen from this chart. It's okay. It's okay. You're not ready. We're going to talk through, and I'm going to show you why sometimes like this is helpful and what this did for me personally as a developer who is actively building a product right now, what's in it, and why I think sometimes doing stuff like this that's kind of messy and doesn't always have to look, like I guess really like fancy, appropriate, and like, I guess social media worthy is okay. So I hope you're ready. Here we go. Oof, it's a lot. Okay. This is something from a project I'm actually working on now, ShardDog. This is not something that's in production. This is something that we've actually, we've gone away from, right? So this was something that, if you can see carefully on my screen, it says like big picture. And this was a while back. This was thinking through, like, what does the product start to look like? And the reason why I want to show this, and I'm not giving away anything that we're working on now, is because this was like so important to really put onto a screen and visualize of like what the product was doing and like where it could go and like what was going to be involved. Now, my project right now, ShardDog, it's 2 of us. I'm the only developer though. And we both make decisions though on product. And so we both need to be able to talk it through. So I need to be able to both talk about all the things that we've discussed today so far. Decisions about like what's going in production, what's, why things are not going in production, what can be built, what's not being built. What is the actual flow of things? Now, this is more of a traditional flow chart in the sense of like, this is actually showing a user flow. But I will say, like, this became something where after doing this, it was like, oh, this isn't the right way to go about this. And I'll explain why as we kind of go through this a little bit here. But I first put a key up here to kind of get a sense of, like, in this example, how much stuff is needed, how much infrastructure is needed to achieve this. And you start looking at this and you say, oh, okay, this is a decent amount of infrastructure for a small team. It's not abnormal. It's not, too much where, like, again, like I think in 2024, building a startup, depending on what you're doing, you could easily have a bunch of infrastructure. What's missing from here as well is all of the stuff that we were doing on chain as well. So this is just simply like the, like non-blockchain related stuff part of it. This is just that basic. So you start to see that and you're like, okay, that's a lot. And then you start looking through these different processes and you're like, well, I have these couple different flows and the flows all seem to be reliant on this part here of like, oh, I need a wallet. And like, look how complicated like these flows become. Like when somebody needs a wallet, it's like, oh, all of this has to go on. And then, oh, if I don't need a wallet, well, okay, it's a little bit better, but maybe we need to actually do, we talked about like doing some like user rep scores and things like that. And then we say, oh, well, look at all the different APIs that have to go into it, and so you're like, okay. And like over here too, it's like, oh, how many different APIs we have to have for this side of it, once we actually look into it. And it just becomes like almost unruly of you're like, this is a lot. And the part that made us pivot a part of it here, and this is like, I can't tell you why. I mean, if you need a real example of why this is so important to do this type of stuff, is that when we actually saw what we needed to do that we thought was going to make it successful for doing wallet creation in a way that was both, saving us some, issues with like bots and abuse, making sure that the user had a really good experience, to make sure that, that account creation was able to then lead to something else, like meaning like using something else in the ecosystem. It became a lot. It was a lot of effort and work just to do that one piece. And that piece, while ShardDog does focus on onboarding, the actual opening of the wallet is like a smaller piece of like what we're really trying to do. And so for us, it was like, okay, this is not the right path. And that's when we, then if you had been following along with us, that we then kind of pivoted a little bit to leverage current wallets in the ecosystem that had ways to like more quickly open a wallet and then like redirect back to us. And so like we worked with groups like at the time it was Mintbase, now it's BitDay, Meteor, Here Wallet. We worked, we tried to build something out with all of them of like, here's a way you can claim your wallet and then go back to ShardDog. And that was really important for us in the development process because it allowed us to focus on other things that were more core to what we were trying to do and try to get to in the big picture with ShardDog. But I would say that we went for a while. Now I'm gonna put this up here. Maybe it's a little bigger so you can kind of see of what goes on here. It of what of hey, like this is, we're gonna have to build out all these different parts just to be safe. And you can see that this flow here, right? So this make now was actually not there at first. Like it was just right to this flow. And then like Meteor came out with their one click, basic sign up, and we were like, oh, well, if I just want to make it now, I just do that. Like, look at, like, I bypass all of this and I get right to where I'm going. And like, that's what, like, that changed what we started to do. Because we were like, this gives us no extra benefit. Like, it doesn't do anything. If anything, it maybe causes more problems because if one piece of it goes wrong, it could lead to abuse. We've never raised money. And so like, this is fully bootstrapped. So if this gets abused and it gets botted and now people are, draining our accounts to create wallets, like that's not a good look either. So like, we don't want any of that. So then you see this and you're like, oh, well, I could just take this one simple path. And then you're like, yeah, that's it. Like, that's what we're going to do. And so we moved to that. And then we did it with Mintbase as well. And like, that made all the sense in the world because, again, it allowed us to focus on some of the more key stuff that we're trying to do, big picture, that was not necessarily like in our core planning per se, right? So I think that's the stuff for me that I really think is like super important. And that's why I would also say that when you are starting to think through your software, again, I want to really hammer this home that you're taking, if you're not going to take time on the stories, and again, that's a separate discussion. We'll talk about like story development, agile development, things like that another time. But if nothing else, making these visualizations are really, I think, just incredibly important for how you start to plan long term. Okay. Lastly here, like, so again, this is a little blurry here. Let's straighten this out a little bit. Okay. There we go. So one of the things that came up right here at the end is it starts to let me think a little bit more about of like what can I save, and maybe that's both, right? That's both like time and money. Okay, when I start to build out, where are friction points, and goes to both parts of this. So yes, your user, right? That's, you're making flowcharts, right? But also as a developer, and hopefully the example I just showed you illustrates that, is that when like, we saw all the stuff that goes in to doing what we had in our mind that we thought would be a strong user experience, and that we thought was the way to actually do it the right way for something like, again, we'll call it account creation, right? Then where we said, oh, well, there's this other solution out here. Yes, it's third party. And so we're not owning that part of the stack, but it's going to allow us to focus on other stuff. Like amazingly helpful. Like that's something that, again, it changed the direction of how we started to plan the future of the whole product and what then came later. So that's an important piece. So we're saving time, we're saving money, we're looking into what the frictions are for the user as well as for the development process of this. All of that together again starts to be super informative, because at the end of the day, okay, and so again, hence the title of the show, Wake Up and Ship More. In order to ship more and ship stuff that is quality enough, stuff that is worth other people's time, not just your own time, it is all about productivity. And, that's something where, like, if you're not being productive, it's, when you are a, again, solo or small team dev, like that's a killer. Like that's just going, like you're just going to be stuck spinning your wheels. And especially if you are a solo dev who maybe has a regular full-time job or part-time job, and then is doing maybe like a startup on the side. You're trying to do something new. You're trying to experiment and hack your way. You need to be productive. You need to have that productivity. And charting this stuff out, both from, like, again, the flowchart process of it, because again, that can save me some of the stuff with around and doing testing and things like that, as well as productivity of decision making, which is sometimes, again, the biggest, I guess, time suck, is like working on something that you're never going to ship. I'm building out something. I'm never going to ship this. So I need to be able to make sure that I am being very clear of what my direction is. And am I making the right decision? And then can I have the right conversation with maybe my co-founders, or even just an outside party if I'm trying to show that idea. So like we talked about last week with the MVP. We said, look, the MVP is trying to solve a couple different problems here. Some of those problems are around, like, does my idea make sense, right? Do you understand what's trying to happen here? And, and that's a piece of it. And this kind of goes back into that MVP part of it of like, hey, if I show you this flowchart, if I show you this diagram of what goes into my app, is that going to make sense to you in order to actually, leverage this? And is this something if I then build it, will it make sense to do? So that's how that all kind of fits together. I think, again, I am a huge proponent of this. It's something for myself that has really changed my personal productivity over the years. I started doing this probably about 10 years ago, and it really changed a lot of things for me, not just of being more efficient in the work I've done, but really being able to think through stuff. Because and again, like all developers do this. This is not like a unique thing. If you actually are caught up in something like, it's all in your head, right? And you're just trying to build, right? It's great to get it on paper. And sometimes like writing it out is not the right path. So this is one part of that. Secondarily is that if I'm trying to really, again, like future plan, and I really want to be able to say like what needs to be done now, charting this out, like super powerful. And so I really want to like emphasize that this is a skill that's super helpful. And there's no real right or wrong way of doing this. I showed you multiple examples of multiple different ways that I have done this, from ways that are a traditional flowchart all the way to like, here's this diagram that's color coded only in the way that makes sense to me, but I put a key up there so you could see, so that it could lead to a discussion, so it could lead to a conversation, it could lead to all these different things. So just something to really consider. That's it for today. I hope this was informative. Please join the conversation on Telegram if you have questions. If you're watching the replay, make sure you're doing that. Also, too, if you haven't already, make sure you're signing up for the for the newsletter, through DevHub. It's all things developer in the near ecosystem. We're also going to talk and have some more different highlights from this show as well as our DevHub Live. We'll be live again tomorrow, both with this show, Wake Up and Ship More, as well as DevHub Live comes back tomorrow too, to have some cool discussions with some developers as well. And so we're really trying to make sure that, if you are building, we want to help provide resources to you to improve that. If you have ideas and suggestions for the show, please join the group, and you're more than welcome to suggest those of the group. But otherwise, until tomorrow, I am Joe. You can message me anytime on X or through that Telegram group, and keep building and keep shipping. See you tomorrow. Thanks.